But I want to invite you now to kind of continue with me on the next unfurling of this conference. We started with workshops into talks that are now setting the stage for this keynote to help us think together about the social and cultural facets of our networked infrastructures. I want to begin by acknowledging this sacred land on which our networks will take place. Takarano has been the site of human activity for 15,000 years. This land is the territory of the Huron-Wendat and Petun First Nations, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. The territory was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and Confederacy of the Ojibwe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Today, the meeting place of Toronto is still the home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work in community on this territory. And at a moment when it seems so easy to see the way things are wrong, and with the hopes that we have this weekend to hold and make space together for livelihood, solidarity, and survival, it felt important for us as organizers to take seriously and reflect on what it means to be holding an event in this present moment and here in the Great Lakes region and the settler colonial context of Canada. And while that still feels very much like a work in progress, it is some type of work we look forward to continue, I feel like we have took some really important or meaningful to me steps for this year. I don't have a good segue, so I will just start my next paragraph. Nick Estes powerfully argues in his work on Indigenous resistance, Our Histories of the Future, drawing on and writing alongside Indigenous studies and African Marxist scholars, that there has to be an acknowledgement that we live in a capitalist society and we can't extricate ourselves from that, but at the same time we have remnants of non-capitalist and anti-colonialist ways of viewing the world. Thinking together about possibilities for education, forms of knowledge, and media that allow for that acknowledgement are why I'm so excited for our keynote. So Dr. Jennifer Wemigwans is Anishinaabe from Wemigwan First Nation. She is a new media producer, writer, and scholar specializing in the convergence between education, Indigenous knowledge, and new media technologies. Jennifer takes pride in working to invert the conventional use of media by revealing the potential for Indigenous cultural expression and Indigenous knowledge through new technologies, education, and the arts. Tonight, her talk, A Digital Bundle, Protecting and Promoting Indigenous Knowledge Online, looks at ways to advance Indigenous knowledge on the internet through Indigenous protocols and ethics while demonstrating a profound appreciation for Indigenous knowledge systems. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jennifer Wemigwans.
Thank you, Dawn. Okay, Miigwech, thank you for inviting me here. I'm happy to contribute to our networks 2019. Tonight, I'm going to present on my book, A Digital Bundle, Protecting and Promoting Indigenous Knowledge Online. I'm turning on my timer so I can see where I'm at as I'm going through the talk. I'm going to share with you what Indigenous networking looks like through the recognition of a new cultural artifact, a digital bundle. This designation not only identifies and elevates Indigenous knowledge online, but is a form of resistance to colonial practices that would undermine and silence Indigenous knowledge. A digital bundle, then, is not only a form of resistance to the state, but a new infrastructure for creating community, solidarity, a new infrastructure for creating community, solidarity across Indigenous nations using our own cultural practices and protocols. I begin from the premise that fourdirectionsteaching.com is a no form on the internet that challenges existing social configurations of power. The site does so by contributing to social and political transformation from the periphery of mainstream society through helping to revive the cultural foundations of Indigenous communities. The online project, fourdirectionsteachings.com, was conceived to give expression to Indigenous worldviews through the teachings of elders and traditional teachers from 5 distinct Indigenous nations. They are Tom Porter, Mohawk; Mary Lee, Cree; Stephen Augustine, Mi'kmaq; Lillian Pitawanakwit, Ojibwe; Reg Crowshoe, and Jeff Crow Eagle, Blackfoot. This online project, which I'm going to show you the introduction, Indigenous oral traditions by process of listening with intent, as each elder or traditional teacher shares a teaching from his or her perspective on the richness and value of cultural traditions from their nation. So here is the introduction to the site.
The American continents have been called the New World, but our histories as the original peoples of these lands tell us we have always been here, that we belong to these places which are sacred to us. Our collective memories go far back beyond what the modern world considers history. We have shared these continents in all the 4 directions for many thousands of years. To us, this is the old world, and there have been many nations here through the ages. Each of our nations has always had their own ways of life, with distinct beliefs and languages, economic, political, and social systems, and medicinal, ecological, and other forms of knowledge. Every one of these nations has its own way to recognize its place in the greater hoop that we're all part of, and all our diverse forms of knowledge lead back to that common circle. Through our various traditions, we recognize that everything in the universe is connected, that everything has being and deserves respect. We never worship the sun or animals or other forms of nature as gods, but we recognize that these things are symbols of mysteries that cannot be explained in words, and that they all lead back to the greatest mystery of all, the source of all creation. So through our stories and songs, we have always recognized the same ultimate creative force. Some of our elders still remember and maintain the foundations of our original knowledge. We believe that these forms of knowledge can help address urgent matters for the world today. Here we share a few teachings of elders from some of the original nations of North America: the Mi'kmaq of the Atlantic region, the Mohawk or Haudenosaunee of southern Quebec and Ontario and upper New York State, the Ojibwe or Anishinaabeg of the Great Lakes region, the Cree or Nahiawak of the Canadian prairies and woodlands, and the Piikani Blackfoot of southern Alberta and northern Montana. Welcome to the 4 Directions Interactive Teachings.
So you can see that audio narration is provided throughout the site and complemented by beautifully animated visuals. In addition, the site provides free curriculum packages for grades 1 to 12 to further explore the vast richness of knowledge and cultural philosophy introduced in each of the teachings. This project was uploaded to the World Wide Web in 2006 and was inspired by my work in the early 2000s as an adult literacy instructor. The idea was that these teachings would be immediately accessible to frontline workers who often struggle to find appropriate resources on Indigenous knowledge. Access to the site is free. I pay the annual hosting costs for the website since currently there are no funding bodies specifically committed to online Indigenous knowledge projects. That said, Indigenous ontologies and cosmologies are regenerating communities across Turtle Island and reconnecting Indigenous people with their spiritual and cultural power. My work looks at how Indigenous knowledge online has had sociocultural effects and how information communication technology affects relationships among diverse Indigenous peoples and the flow of power between Indigenous peoples and the state. Indigenous knowledge online is instrumental to the success of Indigenous community resurgence and radical application of knowledge in all fields, including education, health, law, and social well-being. In researching my book, the interviews conducted across Canada reveal not only the dialectical relationship between online and offline political action and engagement, but also how activists, educators, and frontline workers use Indigenous knowledge online to create, develop, and enhance their own work. Indigenous Knowledge Online speaks back to dominant colonial systems of knowledge in Canada by representing an active presence rooted in the local soils of diverse elders and knowledge keepers. The revitalization of Indigenous knowledge systems and practices are key to the movement of Indigenous resurgence and ultimately the transformation and sustainability of Indigenous communities. So to really comprehend the significance of a digital bundle, you need to understand that Indigenous knowledge is a complex epistemological paradigm. To better articulate it, I have pulled the definitions below from my readings of Marlene Brandt Castanello, Tayaki Alfred, Leanne Simpson, and John Burroughs. For example, I perceive Indigenous knowledge in two distinct forms: sacred teachings and personal knowledge. Sacred teachings consist of traditional knowledge passed on through ceremonial protocols. Only elders and traditional teachers who have been gifted the Indigenous knowledge and teachings in this way can share those teachings publicly and transfer them. This type of Indigenous knowledge is often considered as belonging to the community and held in trust by knowledge keepers and elders expected to abide by the cultural protocols entrusted to that knowledge. As a producer of Indigenous knowledge media projects and as an academic, I make it a part of my practice to articulate this distinction so as not to assume or usurp the role of a knowledge keeper or to disrespect Indigenous protocols held by elders who carry the Indigenous knowledge for their communities. In clearly articulating my knowledge as acquired knowledge, and in recognizing Indigenous knowledge keepers and elders as representing the Indigenous knowledge protocols of their communities, I hope to convey the importance and significance of locating how Indigenous knowledge is respectfully represented in my media practice and academic work. The phenomenon of internet users searching for Indigenous knowledge online demonstrates the need for access to Indigenous knowledge and reveals the intentions, experiences, and perceptions of Indigenous internet users who intuitively navigate the internet with a complex understanding of Indigenous epistemology. The work in my book discusses how knowledge production in relation to the community The work in my book discusses knowledge production in relation to the community using the example of how fourdirectionsteachings.com is taken up by visitors who use the site and how the site came to be accepted as a legitimate source of Indigenous knowledge online by many Indigenous artists and educators and Canadian institutions and organizations that work with Indigenous peoples. It is important to note that fourdirectionsteachings.com was created and produced within Indigenous protocols, demonstrating Indigenous practice and applied Indigenous ethics in the construction of the site. So in thinking of this site as a digital bundle, we can see that a digital bundle represents a new social movement. Manuel Castells defines the networks of the internet as a new social structure that has transformed communication networks and socialization. These networks can be broadly defined as two competing streams on the internet: the consumption model, which privileges features that support commercial transactions and advertisements such as Facebook, Google, and Amazon, and the community model, which relies on communication features that support online community and public life. The community model represents an inversion of mass media broadcasting and publication by allowing a bottom-up alternative through the self-produced communication features of the internet. In writing about social movements, Castell notes that they seek to resist economic and political oppression and reject the political arrogance of elites. The ability to shape minds is the greatest power that one can have because, for Castells, it is harder to control through fear and violence when a large number of people are independently changing how they think. The loss of persuasive influence over people's minds is what arrogant governments and elite institutions fear the most. Much centralized institutional control is lost when alternative notions of social change arise independently. Ideas related to recognizing and valuing Indigenous knowledge in education and community building arise not from Canadian governments at any level, but from Indigenous people who have been disconnected from one another historically. Although Indigenous people have always striven against great odds and often at great personal cost to maintain contact with one another, and nothing can replace the need for real human interaction and knowledge transmission, especially when it comes to Indigenous knowledge, the internet contributes to broader cultural movements such as Indigenous resurgence by serving as a tool that ideally helps disseminate important ideas to act on and connect the minds of many more people than was previously possible. Castells is right when he notes that the most important thing about a movement is not the impact that it has on institutions, but what it does in people's minds. The concept of a digital bundle demonstrates how Indigenous knowledge online contributes in significant ways to the movement of Indigenous resurgence and thereby represents a new social movement, a new internet activism propelled and shaped by Indigenous perspectives and values. A digital bundle, a new social movement, a new cultural artifact, a new genre. In her work, Livro introduces what she calls 5 basic genres of contemporary, alternative, and activist new media projects: culture jamming, alternative computing, participatory journalism, mediated mobilization, and commons knowledge. I came upon this work while searching for ways to frame my analysis of Indigenous knowledge online. Each of the 5 genres represented or presented by Livro is distinct and delivered in a particular way that can be inspiring and engaging. Indeed, her work inspired me to recognize that Indigenous knowledge online is itself a contemporary, alternative, and activist new media project. Yet it is very different from the genres that she outlines. For Livro, these projects do not only reflect or critique mainstream media and culture, they constitute and intervene in them. Desperate to find out where and how fourdirectionsteachings.com might fit into this array of alternative new media, I reviewed each genre carefully. However, I concluded that none really fits how fourdirectionsteachings.com was conceived or how it works. Although aspects of mediated mobilization and commons knowledge projects could be used to describe the work of fourdirectionsteachings.com, that would be like trying to fit a square block into a round hole. For example, according to Livro, mediated mobilization relates to the domain of political, cultural organizing, and social movements. She further explains that it takes advantage of web-based social software, tools like social network sites, personal blogs, flash mobs, and email listservs, as well as do-it-yourself digital media to cultivate interpersonal networks online and mobilize those networks to engage in live and mediated collective action. The Idle No More movement, an Indigenous protest movement, might be described in these terms since it uses Facebook, personal blogs, websites, and listservs to mobilize community flash round dances in public spaces, and therefore engages in live and mediated collective action. fourdirectionsteachings.com does not facilitate the same kind of presence in the streets. Although I appreciate Livro's discussion of the 5 basic genres of contemporary, alternative, and activist new media projects, none is an ideal fit for Indigenous knowledge online. However, I am inspired by her thinking about genres and how Livro applies it to activism on the internet. Indeed, it was her writing on the notion of genre that helped me to envision the concept of fourdirectionsteachings.com as a digital bundle. She defines genre as a type, of expression or communication that is useful and or meaningful among the members of a given community or within a particular situation. Genres have both form and purpose. That is, they have typical material features or follow certain format conventions, and they allow people to express themselves appropriately and to achieve their various purposes or intentions in a given situation. As discussed, fourdirectionsteachings.com can be considered a digital bundle because it is a collection of teachings by respected elders and traditional teachers who have shared Indigenous. Hence, the site is a type of expression and communication that is meaningful to Indigenous communities. Livro also points out that genres have many other significant facets that make them relevant for alternative and activist new media projects. First, she writes, they help mediate or facilitate communication among members of communities. I fully concur with her on this point, as I have found that users not versed in what constitutes Indigenous knowledge are unable to distinguish fourdirectionsteachings.com. They cannot distinguish the site from folklore or digital storytelling. Quoting the work of Kevin Cronstone and Mary Williams, Livro includes their note that genres are useful because they make communications more easily recognizable and understandable by their recipients. Thus, she continues, genres are the means for creating and maintaining community and social contexts and cultural products of those communities and contexts. Moreover, she argues, genres can also be so specific to a certain group's worldview or situation that outsiders may not understand them. So genres can also act as boundaries or markers that exclude outsiders and reinforce the power of insiders. Citing Cranston and Williams once more, Livro concludes that the recognition of a particular genre is one sign of membership in a particular community. In thinking about Indigenous knowledge online as a particular genre, such as a digital bundle, it is possible to see how such projects mediate and facilitate communication among members of Indigenous communities. In fact, my book reflects the insight and participation of Indigenous internet users who are able to make specific distinctions regarding what constitutes Indigenous knowledge and who can therefore speak with experience and authority about its impact online. Furthermore, a genre such as a digital bundle only comes to life as a cultural product for the people who recognize and understand it as such, and therefore it speaks to the notion of a certain group's worldview, one that outsiders might not understand. For example, outsiders or non-Indigenous people might not understand or even recognize the impact of fourdirectionsteachings.com because they have little or no reference point for what constitutes Indigenous knowledge, and as a result tend to ignore and deny funding for such sites or projects. That said, I continue to write grants to upgrade the site from its original Flash HTML to HTML5, a mobile responsive technology. In its current state, the website is accessible to less than 50% of potential internet users. So far, funding to upgrade the site has not been secured. Consequently, there is always That said, I continue to write grants to upgrade the site from its original Flash HTML to HTML5, a mobile responsive technology. In its current state, the website is accessible to less than 50% of potential internet users. So far, funding to upgrade the site has not been secured. Consequently, there is always funding to upgrade the site has not been secured. Consequently, there is always insider community membership, as described above, are applicable and demonstrated by the Indigenous community members who were interviewed for my book. That said, the time has come to elevate the work that Indigenous knowledge is doing online by naming it and providing it with its own genre. I suggest that a digital bundle is an apt name for this genre, since it signals how such projects can act as boundaries or markers that reinforce the power of insiders, that is, Indigenous communities for whom the respectful protection and promotion of Indigenous knowledge online is of paramount significance. To change the appropriative knowledge form and the epistemological assumptions and social values that guide ICT production today, we need to stop positioning difference as alternative. To truly change is to adopt positions and discourses grounded in cultural knowledge that stand alone and apart from the dominant notions of media and consumption preferences for Western audiences. Indeed, Leach and Wilson recognized that the discourse surrounding ICT production and analysis is limited and exclusionary of Indigenous concepts and worldviews. In fact, they note an absence of Indigenous ICT accounts. For one thing, rather surprisingly, while global transformations wrought by ICTs are widely trumpeted, we have remarkably few accounts of ICT initiatives that have meaningfully privileged local knowledge and understanding. The reciprocal effects on the development of these technologies and accompanying social forms in different contexts remain underrepresented. In this way, I hope that my work can contribute to the ongoing dialogue that Leach and Wilson refer to in their conclusion. They say, quote, "We consider an emphasis on ongoing and reflexive dialogue through making and use with people in all sorts of places and with different histories and imaginaries can only enhance the positive subversion, conversion, and ultimately the development of future technologies." Back in 2008, I wrote that the internet has the potential to reinforce and reinvigorate without reinventing or replacing traditional forms of thought and ways of interpreting the world around us that are grounded in authoritative and once communally held sources and symbols. And so, like bundles that are carried by elders and traditional teachings, fourdirectionsteachings.com is transportable and can be accessed when needed and activated at particular times and places when alone or with a group. Also, like a physical bundle, so you can see I'm carrying mine today, a digital bundle stores knowledge and teachings and takes care of them through the process of adhering to protocols. Ultimately, a digital bundle represents the positive subversion on the internet by offering an Indigenous history and imaginary that dares to challenge colonial ideologies by asserting the power and presence of Indigenous knowledge. Projects such as fourdirectionsteachings.com show how Indigenous people are expressing Indigenous knowledge online in ways that contribute to the reflection of Indigenous ontology and values on the World Wide Web. The notion of a digital bundle demonstrates that online spaces can be defined and validated through cultural protocols. Distinct from digital storytelling through its grounding in cultural protocols, Indigenous knowledge is a new kind of tool or resource and hence an opportunity to support the ways in which Indigenous communities are decolonizing the digital. Thank you to the conference organizers for making space to understand what a digital bundle is, as it speaks directly to the resurgence movement within Indigenous communities and to our visions of solidarity and our survival for the next 7 generations. Miigwech.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm wondering if people have any questions now. We can try speaking to our neighbors and formulating some questions if there aren't any immediate ones, but I see one here. Oh, thanks. Thank you, Ben.
On the list of genres that you had on one of your slides, what is alternative computing?
I think that was, if I can remember, because it was a while since I read that, I think it was referring to open software. Yeah, so like.
And how does a digital bundle differentiate itself from being open software?
Oh, because while we will use like PHP, I guess, for programming, it's not, what's more important is for us is the interface design and the content and the way the project actually comes together. So I think the way I read alternative computing, that it was more about open source and that kind of thing, and about people who are involved in open source software and coding sharing their knowledge and propagating that information. So I didn't think that definition of alternative computing really fit with what this is. Also, digital bundles. Right now I'm working on an Indigenous Timekeepers project. We're looking at multimedia platforms to express that Indigenous knowledge, including virtual reality, right? So for us, like, all technology is open for expression and use.
Thank you very much. And a question that I just had, like, is a digital bundle, does that contrast in any way with like how Wikipedia kind of works, in that a digital bundle has an integrity that cannot be touched, and then it's carried on for generations? Is that a contrast between the open way Wikipedia works?
Yes, exactly. The idea of 2.0 doesn't work for Indigenous knowledge projects because this is protocol and sacred teachings. So we just can't have everybody kind of adding in their thoughts and, because who knows, like 7 generations from now, digital bundle or wampum belts might mean pink beads on, nylon backgrounds. Like, we just can't let that happen. And so the idea is that a digital bundle is a sacred in a sacred space. And so when Indigenous people have come to Four Directions teachings, they recognize the protocols right away. They see the interface design is holistic. They see that the teachings are not pan-Indian because every single teaching, it's acknowledged which elder, why that elder, the bio is there, it connects you to who that person is. They also feel that the way, it's an intuitive reaction, like they're feeling, a lot of people, especially the artists, commented that the educators too and system workers commented that they could feel that this was done in a good way. And indeed, the first teaching we went out to get, the whole project was put through ceremony, right? So there's Dr. Reg Croce, who talks about, Blackfoot protocol being venue, action, language, and song. So he, with Four Directions teaching, he asked me, under whose cultural protocol are you here? And I, as a producer at the time, I was really confused. And are you talking about the funder? I didn't know what to, and then he explained Blackfoot ceremonies and venue, action, language, and song. And then I understood, and I was able to tell him that, Lillian Pitawanakwit, an Ojibwe Anishinaabe elder, had put the project through ceremony. We did, we were in a lodge, there was fasting, we took 3 days, there was a pipe ceremony, so there was drumming, singing, so it was covering off all of that. And the prayers, of course, were said in Anishinaabe. All of that was to ensure and kind of propagate that this work would be lifted and taken out into the world and begun in a good way. So once he heard that, Dr. Reg Croce, who's Blackfoot, said to me, okay, good. Somebody knew what to do, and started you off, so now we can begin. And then he was able to share the Blackfoot teaching with me.
Thanks for that insight.
Yeah.
Hi, thanks for your great talk. Two quick questions. How does the project sustain itself? And do you imagine there's a version of it that operates offline, meaning through like the sharing and distribution of like hard drives or like, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we also offer it in HTML. So all the transcriptions are there with the different visuals. And yes, communities are free to cut, paste, reproduce, photocopies, and they've done that. Usually, if educators from different school boards, like people in Quebec, have contacted me and said, "Can we use part of this in our curriculum?" And so, yeah, as long as people are reaching out and saying what they're using it for, then I usually tell them that's no problem to take it out of the context of the website where it lives and use it somewhere else. However, that said, I did get a call from England, London, and it was during the phase, if you can remember, with the fashion and the boho and the kind of Gucci and the way everything was like feathers and fringe. And somebody had contacted me, and it was a guy who was retailing and selling teepees for European travelers. And he wanted to know if he could take the teepee teaching from Mary Lee to help promote his product. And I said, no, but you can refer people to the site and they can look at the teepee teaching there and try to understand the context in which it's presented. After I spoke with him, I was really concerned. I called Mary Lee and I said, this makes me think, like, is this bad? Like, should we be rethinking this? And she said, no, we have nothing to worry about. He doesn't possess the cultural protocols. He did not go through ceremony. There's nothing that he can do with that teaching that will give it efficacy. So she said, I, as the elder who carries that teaching and that ceremony and protocol, I've given it that efficacy. And so I feel very comfortable, and she reassured me not to worry.
Is 4directions.com sort of geared towards a particular kind of audience in terms of age group, style of learning? Are there different ways to pass these teachings on to different kinds of like age groups, backgrounds?
Yeah, so originally, it was conceived when I was working as an adult literacy instructor, and I was working in Indigenous not-for-profits across Toronto, and we were trained by elders and knowledge keepers that to do this work, we should be using Indigenous knowledge in the classroom. And, my fellow colleagues, all Indigenous from various backgrounds, we were concerned because we're not elders and we're not traditional knowledge keepers. So how do we do that? So this is when these conversations began. So when we thought about it, it was originally like, yeah, this should be great for frontline workers who are in literacy centers where they could have, like for example, some of the drop-in centers I worked in were, Native men's residence, Native Women's Resource Center. I worked at Queen and Bathurst, at the meeting place, and a lot of these places have computer rooms, right? So a lot of people who are homeless or in transition will come and use the computers, and that's when we started thinking, how can we leverage this technology to help us, but also to give people independence to learn and explore? So it was conceived in that way for adult learners, and then as we went through the project, we realized this could be, suitable for grades 1 to 12, and so we created curriculum for it. What I found in my research when I began looking at, what is the impact of this project? I found that, and I was very surprised and shocked, that Dr. John Burroughs, who just opened the first Indigenous law school in Canada at the University of Victoria, that he uses the site to teach his Indigenous law classes. And I was shocked. And Larry Chartrand, who is also a Métis lawyer in University of Ottawa, said the same thing. And so I asked him, how does that work for you? And he said, because the creation stories are the natural laws. These teachings represent the natural laws. They are the Indigenous worldviews. They are knowledge. So when we want to look at how to talk about law and what that looks like from an Indigenous perspective, we need to go to the elders. We need to go to the knowledge keepers. So it was really people like Dr. John Burroughs who opened my eyes to realizing that, okay, this is something more than just a little educational website, right? That this represents something that our communities need, and that will have extensive impact. And so when I'm working with Indigenous timekeepers and thinking about VR and interactive online documentaries, we're looking at how those also will become part of that genre of a digital bundle, right? Because they will be informed and closely developed and constructed with the elders and knowledge keepers who are sharing their teachings. So it's out there. Unfortunately, the other, when I launched this project, I had over 150 unsolicited emails from people across Canada who were using the project in different ways. And a lot of it was from, people who work in the system. So I had people who are in the prisons saying, this is great, we use it to train our parole officers, children's aides. Yeah, we're using it because they want to create some cultural sensitivity, right, with their parole officers, with their social workers from children's aides, et cetera. And so they would use that site to try to explain the philosophy. So in that way, people were finding it and using it in all kinds of different ways. But I think that at the end of the day, that's good. If they can understand what that means and those teachings for parole officers and social workers, then it needs to be out there. I'm a little concerned that I think that people need to be instructed first on what is Indigenous knowledge before they can actually appreciate the site. So that's where I wonder how, I don't think that the depth of knowledge, what people are using when they're doing training for parole officers or social workers, I don't think, unless those are being facilitated training by Indigenous people, I wonder about the depth, right, of what they're actually attaining and walking away with. Yeah. So do you have a question back there? Okay. I saw him a few times.
Sorry. A few moments ago, you said that your project was only accessible to about 50% of potential internet users. Is that due to linguistic accessibility or internet or outreach, or could you elucidate that a little more?
It's just because I think the technology is kind of outdated and outmoded. Like flash technology is not something people are really downloading, and I think that if it was HTML5 and could be used on tablets and phones and that kind of thing, it would start to have a more robust presence for internet users.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
Are there any more questions? One at the front.
Hi. Correct me if I'm wrong. The digital bundle, does that include the preparation, the ceremonies? Is that part of the bundle?
It's all part of the protocol. Yeah.
Right. And could you talk to your own personal experiences with that sort of protocol? How did that make you feel? How did that change how the project sort of started for you?
I think it really affirmed and gave reassurance because, like I said earlier, when you get a call from London, England, and somebody wants to use teepee teachings to, sell teepees to boho kinds of tourists, right, to backpack and travel across Europe, yeah, that doesn't feel good. That's kind of a sick feeling in your gut, oh, maybe we shouldn't be making these things available. But when we went through the protocol and the ceremony, and I got that feedback from Dr. Reg Crowshoe and the feedback from Mary Lee, it starts to affirm that we need to start reaching our own communities. We need to reach our own youth. And one of the things, the elders say is that no one should ever come to the door of a lodge without knowing what they're walking into. And so even putting introductions to teachings online, like Four Directions teachings, it gives even youth and homeless people and people who are struggling and disenfranchised from their cultural knowledge, it gives them a little bit of something to go, oh, right, that's, I can relate to this. I feel good about this. And what we were hoping was that it would be that impetus for them to go back into community and ask their own elders and knowledge keepers for those teachings. So there's so much to your question because it relates to, so many political and social kinds of ills that we deal with in our community, and how do we reach our youth, and how do we start regenerating Indigenous knowledge for them? Because like everyone in this room, I did not learn about Indigenous knowledge in the Canadian elementary school. I did not learn about it in Canadian high schools or in university. So, you know, you have to go to community to learn that. And then only now we're starting to see Indigenous knowledge courses being taught at the university level. So at OISE, I actually teach a course on Indigenous knowledge, I teach a course on Indigenous worldview, and a course on Indigenous research methods. So yeah, Digital Bundle covers all of that. So there's a lot of intersections and convergences for sure.
I think we might have time for one more question, and I think I saw one here.
I was wondering whether this website is intended to be used by the Indigenous communities, or you were thinking about more of a broader audience, because as like a format of the website, everyone can go, and as you mentioned, you're concerned for like being misunderstood, or like not having the prior knowledge or like training to perceive that content. I wonder if the format is like intended to be publicly seen, or like some of it, or like maybe there is a differentiation between the audience, like Indigenous audience versus non-Indigenous.
Yeah, thank you for that question. It is important. What we realized when we were in construction of this project was that we had to make decisions about, you know, how can I say this? You know, we would go to communities and we did not prescribe to the elders or knowledge keepers, you have to share a creation story, or you have to do this. We asked them, what do you feel comfortable sharing? And so what their teachings were is what they shared. Now, you know, one of the things in the book that I talk about is that there was a huge controversy when a few years ago, APTN went into a Sundance ceremony and filmed the ceremony. There's a big difference between showing introductions or teachings that are carefully constructed, like co-constructed between myself and elders, versus displaying a ceremony, right? So that is where I draw the line. As an Indigenous producer, I would never create for public consumption a pipe ceremony, because that's the last thing we need is for people out in boho land in Europe with their teepees now doing pipe ceremonies, right? So it's just, we have to think about that, and we don't want them mimicking those processes and denigrating that process. So yeah, so we're being very conscious about what is allowed, and this is also decided by elders and knowledge keepers themselves, so that's part of the protocol. We understand that some teachings can be shown, but maybe not all of the teachings. We also know that some of these teachings, like if you go to listen to a Thanksgiving address, or you go to listen to the 7 grandfather teachings, like some of these teachings can go on for days. Like you're in a lodge and you're sitting there for days listening to that teaching. What we show is just a very glimpse of that. So to orientate and help people understand a little bit and maybe start asking questions.
Thank you both for those thoughtful questions and really generous answers. I have to do a little logistics before I let us stand up. So the day is not over yet. We're just gonna ask your help maybe with us clearing the chairs afterwards. But we have 2 performances starting around 8-ish. On the Wire from Adam McFillin and Pale Eyes from Ben McCarthy. We'll have a cash bar at the back, as well as some light snacks, which I've been warning you is not a full meal, still true. And then I just have to announce one small schedule change for tomorrow. Registration is still happening at the same time, but we've had a switch of one of our morning talks. So instead of waiting for NIN in New Orleans from Jennifer Seaman Cook, we're going to have a 1-hour kind of like remote I don't know how to say this. Renee Reisman is going to, in lieu of Danny, who unfortunately could not join us, give a version of that collaborative discussion starting at 10:30 tomorrow morning. So I think that's it for now. And I just wanted to say finally, join me in thanking Dr. Wemigwans for her wonderful keynote.